audio was very clear for Oops. Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you today to Life Matters, Gainesville End-of-Life. You can please mute. Thank you so much. Today we present Life Matters, Community Connections with Gainesville End-of-Life Doulas. This is a new monthly series on the second Wednesday of each month. We'll be available on Zoom, and we're here in person at the Senior Rec Center. I'm very excited to announce that in December, Carlos Gonzalez, the Executive Director of Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery, will be here to present in December. Today's discussion is about legacy work. Have you thought about your own life legacy and ways to capture your life story? Let's talk about the things that matter most to you. I'd like to hand it over to Anna, who will introduce herself and get us started.
Can you advance the slide?
Yes. There
Thank you. My name is Anna Schwait, and I am an end-of-life doula. I've been doing this work now for the past few years, and I truly enjoy having the opportunity to share some of the strategies and some of the techniques that we use in this work. And I know that in our society, we don't think about death, except maybe in trying to avoid it. But as doulas, what we find is that we're very comfortable talking about life and about death, and being able to embrace the topic with ease and comfort. And that's what we would like to present this afternoon, just ways of how did we get to this place in our life today where we find ourselves, to be able to start to explore where we are right now, right today, in the dynamics of it all. And I wanted to present some of the work of Erik Erikson, who is a psychologist, or was a psychologist, who left us a series of steps. He called them stages. 8 stages, he said, that we go through as we start out from infanthood all the way up until adulthood and old age, our elder years. And he described this mainly as a tool to give us an idea of what landmarks, perhaps, or what formation is happening in our personality as we go through these stages. Now, 5 of the stages occur before we're 20, so they're happening and we're just launching out. I don't know where you were at when you were 20, but I was just launching out into the world, getting my first job and getting situated. So the experiences that we have all vary. The experiences don't fit into the stages, but what the outcome he thought would come out of these stages was, like in stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. And if we can have the next slide, I'll show you what exactly he meant. These are the stages that he described, and basically that as we are moving through in life, and for me it made sense, and I can relate the story of when I was in this middle age year, that I was going back to school to get my master's degree. And I was learning psychiatry, so there I met Mr. Erikson's work. And I thought, oh, how perfect that at this age, at age 50, I am in my middle age, and I am now pursuing a life career, focusing on what I want to contribute to society and who I am. And I have fit exactly where he's at. So fast forward 16 years when I'm ready to retire, and now I'm walking out the door, and I look at the next stage, and it's integrity versus despair. And I thought, oh my goodness, what in the world does that mean? I didn't know exactly what the terminology of it meant. Whether or not I was going to achieve the virtue of wisdom, or whether I was going to fall into this spiral of feeling discomfort, feeling restless, feeling dissatisfied, going back and only finding negative things about my life, or whether I was able to embrace the whole journey. And that's what we wanted to focus on today, that as we approach and are at this place in our life, that we can embrace what we've been through, that we can acknowledge what we have experienced, and that we can say, how can I now gather it all so that it starts to make sense in my life? How can I now explore it all so that I have meaning for myself and for who I am? How can I leave something meaningful for my family or for my friends so that they will remember me when I'm not here? And so if we go to this next slide, when we talk about life review and we talk about the Legacy Project, I wanted to stop right here a minute and say life review is something that we do for ourselves, our own life meaning. What did it mean to me when I was in childhood, adolescent, when I moved on to marriage and becoming a mother? And those things don't happen for all of us, and certainly don't happen in that sequence. But what we can acknowledge is that we have had those pivotal points in our lives, those stages that we have all been through and that we all know so well. And so as we look at this, the life review and the life meaning is about me, to put me at ease, to give me peace, to give me a sense of this is where I am finding myself right now, and how can I now review it all, look at it all, and leave it at a good place. And why create a legacy project? What is this work about? Why even bother with this? Well, how do you want to be remembered? For me, it means, you know how people, when they, sometimes I see graffiti and it says, I was here. Well, I was here, and I want someone to remember that I was here. And I want to be able to leave that documented for, in my case, I have daughters, so I can leave things for them. And I can leave things for grandchildren, and I can also leave things for friends. And what are these things that we're talking about? They're not just things that are in abstract. We actually make something out of it. We create something tangible with the Legacy Project. We physically create something that we can hand over or leave behind for them after we pass away. And the best time to start it is now, because we have time now. We have the clarity of mind now. We have the ability now. And we wanted to present at least some of the strategies and listen to your questions and your concerns and be able to approach your needs and help you out so that you can create something meaningful for yourself and for your family members. So I do want to pass it to William so that he can talk to us a little about some of these legacy projects and his own experience in the work.
Hello, my name is William. I'm a licensed funeral director that specializes in natural burial. And during my education and doing my internship in Gainesville, I came upon several doulas in Gainesville who encouraged me to volunteer at hospice, to do education around end-of-life when I went to the University of Vermont end-of-life certificate program. I found myself as a funeral director wanting families to have conversations long before the end. I was pivoting from a career in the art world and wanting to be a helper. I wanted to be someone who was assisting families and the clients that I worked with make meaning. And so I found myself moving from different projects and learning about training programs as an end-of-life doula who might consider specializing in legacy work. I had a sense that we could do better at end-of-life, that we could look for meaning and make opportunities for this. In seeking out these kinds of projects, I felt like there was a kind of celebratory moment that could be had, that we could turn away from this fear that it's morbid to do reflective things, to write our own obituaries, to move and look through photographs, to prepare in advance for a ceremony in the future, and that it was a useful exercise in reflection. It was a moment to realize maybe when you had incompleted moments in your life that needed some further visitation. Maybe there was a moment of reconciliation, that this work could thrust you forward and be a space of hope and thinking about your future. I learned about Dr. Harvey Max Chinchinov's training program while I was at the University of Vermont. He was a Canadian psychiatrist with a specialization in palliative care, and he introduced this idea of a relatively new idea called dignity therapy. It was developed as a unique therapeutic tool to reinforce a sense of meaning, a sense of self, and a connection to community and family. At its core, it offers people an opportunity to speak about issues that matter to them most, as well as aspects of their lives that they want to be remembered by. As a practitioner, you schedule 1 or 2 uninterrupted blocks of time, and you go through a questionnaire surveys. In the chat, I've dropped a PDF that you can open and download for yourself at home. Last winter, I felt compelled after the pandemic to sort of visit my mom at the holidays and to go through some of these questions. And at first she was a little reluctant, but as soon as we moved into the stories and I started asking her questions from the different sort of periods of her life, it was really special. And there are stories that she hadn't told me. There were stories that were a little bit quiet, and there were secrets around them, and I reached a point in our relationship where she could be candid with me. I asked about her earliest memories, and we traveled just a few years ago when my grandmother passed, and it was a really special time to go and travel around her hometown in Ohio. It was a moment to drive by a home and point to the orchards and talk about times when economically it was really hard for her family, and how one of her favorite memories of autumns was going to the tree and bringing down apples and canning with her grandfather, and how they kept those items in the cellar. She told me a story about the fact that there was a fruit huckster. There weren't grocery stores in the way that we knew them today, and that her family traded with neighbors in the community for other winter vegetables, that they did go to a butcher, and we drove down and that butcher wasn't there anymore, but we got to have this in real life experience. And last Christmas, when I started to pull these questions out and say, would you explore this process with me? It was an incredibly meaningful thing to me. I asked about her childhood home, and she closed her eyes, and we were videotaping this and recording this. And I'm really excited that she had a good experience, and she's going to let me come back and revisit these questions, and we're going to come back and have multiple sessions. And it feels really special that I'm going to have these documents in the future. Considering my mother's death is an incredibly hard thing to imagine. It's incomprehensible for me. And as someone who meets with families, it's a way in which I can be a better service to the families I work with. To think about this, to think about my mother's mortality. It makes me and urges me to call her more frequently. We text almost every morning, and I make time to speak with her about what's happening with me, so that it's not just as we move from holiday to holiday. She told me about her home and about her closet that only had 4 dresses in it. She talked about her favorite toys and the neighbors that she grew up with. She told me at length the story about the zoo that she lived down the street from, and at night when she was sleeping, she can hear the elephants, and that her neighbor worked at the zoo and would let her come occasionally to help brush the teeth of the hippopotamuses. And these stories are so powerful, and I feel really honored to sort of take that time with her. And I want to encourage other people to do this, and I'm going to be getting trained to do this with clients. I think this is a really beautiful thing. I think you can take really simple approaches to this by going through these questions and just answering them for yourself, sometimes they're helpful to have these prompts. I think we see our families sometimes and we get caught up in the most urgent things or the busyness of life, and to stop and make time for this is really beautiful. We have a ritual during the holidays that my mother brings out these big Tupperwares, and we go through family photos and we talk about what are happening in the pictures. And it's something I really enjoy with my family, but I've also realized that we need to document some of these things, that some of these stories get lost. And so I've asked her if she'll make little notations on the back to give us clues of times and wheres. I'm not as fluent with some of the relatives that I didn't grow up with, and so to leave us little breadcrumbs feels like a special thing to do. Some other questions on the childhood sections that I thought were really interesting were, what were your relationship with your grandparents like? I think talking about grandparents is a really special way to sort of mirror and project yourself forward. My grandmother was really special to me, and I was sharing with Anna just before that my grandmother, her sense of her mortality was a really powerful gift she gave to me. When she was reaching end of life, it was really important to make a last trip, to see her when she had mobility, to visit with her and make meals and to do things that were special to her. And my grandmother at end of life told me, "Don't be sad for me. I've lived a remarkable life. And these are the things that were special to me when I was your age. And I'm so proud and happy that you're pursuing a career in the arts and that you love going to New York to see theater productions. And here's $100. I want you to go to a Broadway play, and I want you to call me with your cell phone. I want you to call me right after the play and tell me about it." And I love that you have a love for the arts, and that feels like a continuation for me to you and your mother, and that makes me so happy to feel connected that you're still doing these things in the world, and so this is really special to me. The questions go on much in the model that Anna spoke about adolescence, and I think this can be a really interesting moment to learn about your parents in ways that is not in alignment with who they are now. There are moments to sort of know about moments of their awkwardness or identities that they tried on. I feel like I reached a really special place with my mom when she was willing to tell me some stories about silly things that happened to her, or moments of being bullied and how that was hard, or for her to tell me stories about her going on her first date. That was a special bonding moment for me, to have that interpersonal intimacy with her and to reach a point where she could let go of the veneer of I'm in charge and I have to look out for your welfare, and we could be people with each other and share stories. And I took that as an opportunity to share things about myself that maybe I hadn't disclosed to my parents, about wild things I'd done in grad school in New York, or if somebody's not getting stuck in here. I'm just going to jump in so this person can join us.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
And it was a really special experience to go through these questions, to ask my mother in her adolescence who were her closest friends. Who did she really admire? My mother lost her mother at a very young age, before high school, and I had a sense of the stories of her life, but for her to tell me what it was like to go and be educated by Jesuit nuns, and what that transition was like when she lost her mother at a really young age, that was a really vulnerable moment for her to sort of look back and reflect. And it wasn't a story that she told a lot. I think we visit with our family, we hear some stories very frequently, and to probe a little bit and to probe gently can reveal some really beautiful things. My mother would go on to be adopted by a very close friend of my mother's mother, who was at her church, and I had always known that this adoption had happened, But to poke around very gently and ask her these questions, she dug deep and went back to places that she didn't speak about quite so frequently. And that was really special. The questions to go on to ask people about what their 20s and 30s were like, to ask maybe a question about courtship of your parents. I mean, that's definitely something my family didn't speak a lot about. And my parents are divorced now, and sometimes I wondered how they met. And it was interesting to learn that they met in a philosophy class. My mom was going back to take some journalism classes. It was interesting to hear that she was dating another person when my dad and her found out they were pregnant with me. Some of these stories are quiet, and so that felt really amazing. I recommend taking a look at these questions. It's a really comprehensive list of questions, and I think it's even asking yourself these questions can be really interesting. When I met the doulas, I was working on a class about writing your own obituary. I thought it could or would be an interesting workshop that we were doing at the Millhopper Library just before the pandemic. And it was a creative prompt to say, imagine your own obituary in the Gainesville Sun. Here are the rough price points, and so that gives you a framework of how long a text could or would be in terms of the money that you want to spend. And imagine yourself, no matter what point you are at your life. When I worked on my own obituary, I found myself struggling to sort of predict the future, but also I found myself writing down what my hopes were. And at the time I was seeing someone, and that person was helping me film and document the project. And I made a declaration that I imagined myself with this person and that we would have a child and a business. And it was interesting future casting. I think sometimes doing legacy work can still future cast in yourself and the time that you have left, but it also can future cast into the advice you want to give to your chosen family and your family of origin. So no matter where you're at in life, I think it's a useful exercise. It felt like a celebration and a beautiful, intimate experience to have with other people. It moves you very fast past small talk into your most treasured values and sensibilities, your hopes for the future. Back into this. And so this is a document I've made for everyone. For older adults, there were questions in the Dignity Survey about regrets, and I think these are really important conversations. Are there not resolutions at relationships in your life? Are there experiences to share in telling a story about how you might have done something differently? There's also opportunities to talk about faith practices and spirituality and the afterlife. And I think doing these in advance of end of life, and doing these well in advance of end of life, can really ground us in what our spiritual sensibilities are, what we imagine our end of life will look like if we're to work with family or an end of life doula, and get us firm in communicating that with other people so that it's not a surprise. I speak with people as a funeral director all too often about the fact that families thought they had more time, and that there was a sense of urgency and a sense of rushing through things because they hadn't had these conversations in advance. And so I think having these conversations in your 50s and 60s and 70s are beautiful and really intimate points of connection. To have these kinds of conversations with close neighbors, with close family, with people you consider your chosen family, the more these conversations you have, I think the deeper we feel connected to people, the deeper we feel connected to community, and it pulls back on what happens sometimes, which there can be existential dread. And I think these are really powerful ways to take agency. In the final grouping of questions, they talk about legacy in terms of people beyond your time, talking about synthesization of life, giving advice that can be a methodology rather than specific, you should do this. And so sharing methodologies with people can be really beautiful. Since doing this work, I've really been searching for other kinds of books and media, websites and platforms that are taking these ideas and going further. I recently was on a plane to New York going to a film festival called Dying to Know, and I was visiting the producer and founder of a website I highly recommend called bevival.com, bevival.com. It is a deaf literacy platform that uses the arts, theater, music, plays, and they work with New York Times writers and pretty well-known authors to sort of mine these spaces, to have conversations with thinkers who are making work, who are making art, who are making stories and telling stories about end of life and about what that journey looks like, and gives us concrete people to connect with. I had heard about this television show that was coming out onto Peacock called The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. It's being put together by Amy Poehler from Saturday Night Live, which I thought was pretty interesting. The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning by Margaret Magnusson is a very entertaining show, and I'm really proud that society is trying to rebrand the sacred passage into a time of reflection and meaning making. And I felt like it was the in real space equivalent to dignity therapy. It was a time to look about your home and consider the possessions that you have in it. It's a time to remove excess. It's a time to look at your ways to go into digital, to discard with intention and without guilt. It was a conversation about buying less and to be gentle with yourself as you let go of items, gift items, and have conversations. I think I found myself so attracted to legacy work because it front-loaded these kinds of proactive activities you could take that could become ceremony and ritual, and that felt really beautiful. I wanted to read a passage from The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning that I found really beautiful. A very good approach. My mother-in-law was really a very capable and gifted woman. Returning from Japan to Sweden in the 1930s, she opened a small boutique on the city's main street. There she sold silk, china, beautiful lacquer works, baskets, and other things imported from Japan. I believe she was the first Swedish person who used baskets for something other than laundry and picking mushrooms. She would use a basket for beautiful flower arrangements, for example, a style that is now very common and very much used. Very soon, the upper-class women found their way to her shop, which she called Mount Fuji. My mother-in-law had many pleasant and unpleasant stories about how she was treated by certain fine ladies when she served them from behind the counter. In the last years of her life, every time we visited her, when she came to us, she would give us beautiful china plates, a pretty tablecloth, a nicely colored napkin to take home, pressing them into our hands as we left. That went on for many years before she made her last move to her small apartment that would be her final home. It was her method of death cleaning over time. She had slowly and unobtrusively given a lot away in a quiet, kind way. At the time, she had added beautiful and useful things to her friends' and loved ones' homes. At the time, I never realized how thoughtful she was. Of course, there were still things to take care of in spite of her thoughtfulness. but many fewer things than might have been. And I thought that was really beautiful. I really enjoy, and I picked up this book after watching the first few episodes of the show. The show's a departure from this, it's television, but at its core, it's asking really fundamental questions about the objects that you live with in your home. And after a life that has been lived, and as people who are travelers or who have grand ambitions and collections, sometimes these collections can become so grand that we lose pleasure in them, or we can imagine them having another life, and that can bring a great amount of satisfaction. I found this book to be a good balance of really truthful conversations about downsizing to a smaller home after losing a spouse. She talked about moving through items of clothing with practical kinds of sensibilities, and then comes at the very end of the book to the hard stuff, which is going through photographs, going through letters, making decisions about what stories will continue on and what will be fed to what she calls the hungry paper shredder. And there is humor and lightness and balance in this book, and it's a small, quick read, but I found it to be a great way to continue this idea of legacy projects, about gifting people and rituals and ceremonies, bypassing fights that might happen over an object. And so it's equal part hopeful and then also equal parts practical, in that the things that we own and the objects we have can sometimes cause divisions, or stories can come about that maybe you don't wish to be part of your legacy, and to think about those with intention felt really special. I highly encourage the television show. It's an interesting moment we are having in media. We are seeing content about end of life. And it feels like a really interesting moment to be a funeral director, to see end-of-life doulas out in the public, doing content, making work, and speaking at events like this. I want to end with a book that I've just started, which Anna also has. Francesca Arnaldi was the program coordinator when I was at the University of Vermont. This is a book that I've just begun working on. I got an advance copy, and I'm getting through this book. Living Fully and Dying Prepared, an essential workbook to help you reflect back, plan ahead, and find peace on your journey. As I've moved through the workbook, there are prompts that ask you similar questions that were asked in dignity therapies, but it goes about this in a much deeper level. It asks us questions about existential dread, about worry and fear, and then it also gives us opportunities to do things with those worries, to do things with those feelings in the body, and it's a very practical book. I pulled specifically the legacy page that they had in Francesca to continue along with the thread that we're investing today. She says, in addition to letters and recordings, there are several other remembrance gifts to consider. She talks about a memorial garden when her mother-in-law died, giving her 2 bleeding heart plants along with her condolences. With her help from her young kids, they made a special manna garden to memorialize her life. Spaces like these can become a place to visit when you're seeking a sense of connection to someone who has died, as well as a chance to witness the seasons and life cycles. Some people add a bench to the memorial garden for quiet sits, as well as decor, lighting, and chimes. And even if a family leaves the property at some point, they might be able to dig up some of the perennials for their next home. At length, Francesca speaks about death journaling, and she talks through different prompts in which she gives you places to start about writing. And she says, similar to my death journal that I have described, a scrapbook in which I store notes, quotes, poetry, song lyrics, mementos, and instructions for my care, you can create your own assortment of offerings. And I think when we think about journaling, a lot of times it's for us. But the idea of working on a journal that will be gifted to someone special is quite powerful. I recently was going through a storage unit and I actually found a death journal that my very best friend in college wrote me. I was working at a gallery here in Gainesville, and she was my mentor. She was not quite 60, but she had two very aggressive forms of cancer. And she kept a journal, a death journal, about her experiences leading up to her death. And at the time of her death, and I would have no idea how big of an impact this object would be in the future. I was an artist and I didn't imagine I would do this work. She had me go to Target on 13th Street and make copies of these manuscripts that was quite large. And my instructions were to go and to give these to the closest 20 people, and she provided me with an address of everybody. And I came to them, and on her passing, this object was gifted to people. And it is such a profound object to have. It is something that I have been rereading recently. I thought I had lost it, actually. And so to find it again, for it to sort of make its way back to Gainesville as I came back to Gainesville a decade later, has felt like such a special thing, such a special object. And to be able to be brought back to that time when I was having, outside of my immediate family, my first chosen family, a death, really informed the sense of possibility. As an artist, she was a really interesting person. She wanted to talk about her mortality, and she wanted to do special things to bring other people into the folds of her journey. And that was really powerful. Francesca goes on to talk about cookbooks. Many of us demonstrate care to others through cooking, whether it's a favorite birthday cake or a hearty casserole. The thought and energy we put into making a special treat or meal often feels like love manifested. Many treasured holidays and traditions showcase certain menu items. Do you enjoy cooking and baking? If so, think about your personal specialties. What are you known for in terms of your culinary skills? What do you and your loved ones regularly request? Some recipes have been passed down from generations to generations, while others might be all your own. You can capture them within a legacy cookbook. Sprinkle in generous helpings and memories associated with the meals, pro tips for those who will receive it. Lastly, Francesca talks about handmade objects and gifts. And the example she gives is an example I recently encountered, and it was a really powerful moment at a funeral that I was working on. Are you a quilter, or do you know someone skilled in sewing who might want to assist you with the project? Some people turn over persons' collections of souvenir t-shirts into patchwork quilts. I've heard people doing this with ties. And I know I recently was given a phone number for someone in Melrose who will take t-shirts or special textile objects and create this object. And I think how special is it to think about gifting items and having them be transformed into new kind of items that become these legacy objects, that become these mementos. Weaving stories and looking through the quilt of someone recently that commissioned it, it was largely bands and concerts that were really important to them. And there were moments where you could sort of trace the object and share stories about those concerts, adventures, plane trips with friends, and it pulls you into the dignity work in a very natural way. And so those were some examples of some legacy works that I found to be really beautiful. We're gonna leave some time to interact with everybody. I don't know if you want to potentially open up the PDF and share something to the group. Anna, if you have any thoughts. Oh, we've got one more person joining us.
Yes, or if we have any questions or comments or ideas, or you need more feedback on something, let us know.
I don't know why it's hurried up. Lee, would you get us started just so that we can experience what questions are like? We're here in a room with a big screen, and we're just wondering what the audio is like for anyone who might want to have a
Hi.
conversation.
Hi. Yes. What was the hardest question for you to answer when you were going through these questions for you yourself?
In going through Dr. Harvey's questions, I think one of the questions in the childhood, which talked about your relationship with money, was a really interesting question. And it said, were you considered wealthy, poor, or comfortable? I think that was an interesting moment to sort of reflect back. Growing up in Miami, which is a community of extreme wealth, and being aware of sort of people who lived the kinds of lives that you see on television, and that your life didn't look like that. Growing up as a kid, I don't think I had a sense of it, but looking back on it, I realized that maybe I did have a sense of haves and have-nots, and that I transferred high schools to go to a very affluent public high school in Miami, and I never really unpacked that a lot. And thinking about it as an adult was useful, and my parents were really surprised, actually, when I shared with them some of these things, that I had this sense of like my economic identity. And so it was an interesting conversation, and it reframed my parents' sense of like what my experience was like, and then it changed them a little bit.
I think it's important we're able to look at it from different points of view, because we all can experience the same event differently.
Yeah.
And it impacts us differently. And even according to those developmental stages, whether you feel you're launching out of it and being successful, or your interpretation is that, you know, like for me, out of that 21, role confusion versus self-identity, I have to admit I came out pretty confused. I hit the road confused. And, you know, fortunately I had better instruction, or I paid better attention perhaps. But however the combination was, what you're saying as far as hearing the stories, sharing the dynamic, and realizing how we all are affected in the mix, you know, that no one's living in isolation. The situation is that if we don't do the work, it can get into a place of despair and of feeling like, what was it all about? Did I make poor decisions? Have I been a failure? What do I have to show for it? And it can get into that negative self-talk that can really bring us down a notch on top of everything else that I feel that I deal with as I approach these years of my life. When I get a thought in my life like, what were you thinking? How did that, you know, and it doesn't serve me well. I want to be able to look beyond that and to say, yes, it wasn't all good like you're describing. Some of it is gut pain that you feel in your heart pain when you answer some of these questions, and you know that. But we're strong, and we made it through, and we do have a very fulfilling and meaningful experience right now that we can share. And I feel we are responsible to share at this point. That's what the whole outcome is for us to tap into what we have learned and garnered and passed on to others. Do we have any other feedback or questions or ideas?
I'd just like to comment briefly and thank you for this session. About 3 months ago, my granddaughter gave birth to a beautiful little girl. And instead of sending a cash gift, I decided to send a monthly gift over 12 months, and each month tell her about part of my life. And I'm working on the 4th month now. I think this session will be very helpful to me. So thank you very much.
Okay.
I might comment, I'm in my 90s now and preparing for whatever.
Yes, it's nice to have the time to prepare. I remember walking into a situation that was someone that I was just meeting, and we didn't know exactly how much time we had, It ended up being about 4 weeks before she passed away of a late-stage disease, but she was in such distraught because she was finishing up knitting a scarf for her husband, which she was able to do, which she wanted to leave him. He said, "You always make scarves for everybody, but you've never made one for me." So she got busy right off and made him one, and then she was distraught because this legacy work, it takes time, and it takes a little bit of thought. And she said, "I don't have the time." And I had noticed that she had a collection of bells. These bells that you can pick up at a souvenir shop when you travel. And I asked her, "What are those?" And she says, "Oh, those are old bells. Oh, look." And she brought down the tray. And I said, "Would you consider leaving these to your grandchildren and telling them a story about the trip and how you got it and where it came from and what it meant to you?" She got to work right away on that. And when we went to the small funeral that was prepared there at hospice at the chapel, we were able to hand out these stories and bells. And I can't tell you the amount of joy, how meaningful it was, how I felt that they had in their hand a piece of their grandmother, and they were going to covet that and take that with them. And I thought, how meaningful when we can stop and take a moment to reflect on what life will be for them. And how can I soften that a little bit? How can I make that experience richer? Leave them a part of me that they can tangibly hold or read, or the stories or the video, all of these things that when there's a time, and I don't know about you, but I've lost people in my life, and I cherish those things. They've become valuable beyond the precious items that I own. And so that's why I feel so passionate about this work, and I was so happy to be able to partner up with William, who has made this his life work now, and wanted to support him as well. But I'm thankful for your feedback and for your comments.
Well, you might notice, I know that you do quite a bit with filmography as well. Could you talk a little bit about how you incorporate film into helping others prepare their legacy project?
Absolutely. My partner and I have a project called The Calling Hours. It visits with people to do a video kind of version of dignity therapy. We started doing it before I'd even encountered the dignity therapy, and so when that came, that felt like such a fully fleshed out kind of sensibility and way of going through it. And that's been really special. Video has a way of really capturing our sensibilities, our mannerisms, and really can evoke an emotional response when those videos are played at a funeral service, are gifted to family as a kind of digital heirloom. And I think it can be a really special way. We all have access to sort of telephones, and we can do this. And empowering people to sort of have some questions and to move through these, to then do a more high production level of video production can feel really special and can be kind of ceremonial. Photos and videos become kind of modern day ceremonies at this point. When we hire a photographer to come to a wedding or to come to a baptism, when you pose for your photo for graduation or prom, like photos, when you bring up this level of production, become really elevated kind of small miniature ceremonies. And so working with higher levels of production to produce things that brings in a memorial video that then has interviews, those things can live beyond and can go onto the internet and be placed places. I'm working with someone right now who is at end of life, and they really want to record kind of the white papers they're working on for an academic paper because they don't have the space and time to sort of finish producing this. But they are in a place in this work where they're in it, and they want to just put it out. They want to just do a dump of all the information as best they can, and this becomes a way for them to have that information, have an opportunity for someone to pick it up, to encounter it, to experience it. The internet is magical in this way that you can come upon and find things sometimes. If you have an area of expertise or a passion about something, there are ways in which strangers, and this is the best part of the internet sometimes, strangers can find passions and projects you're working with. And I think collecting stories is so important, and that using digital media, whether it's just recording audio, filming video, those can be really powerful objects that don't take up space, that can be passed along and can be incorporated in ceremonies. Working as a funeral director, I want to meet people decades before they are at end of life to sort of make these kinds of objects. And so that when we reach end of life, we could have a table of thumb drives in which someone could walk away with an interview about a really seminal project to your life, where someone could have a collection of the memorial video and can take that home with them from the service, and that can be shared to people who maybe can't attend a service. During the pandemic, I got a crash course in producing ceremonies over the internet, and that was really interesting, and a lot of people showed up to be present at those. And we need to do a better job at bringing a more interactive experience by being really mindful of sort of how we frame things out. I mean, today we're sort of navigating that right now, trying to make the best experience we can through this digital platform. And so I think it's important, without letting it take over, like, we don't need to let these things take over, but we live fluidly with these things now. And so it can be really powerful. But I urge people to go to Best Buy or to go to their local tech stores. There's so many things we can do in a lo-fi way. You can record things on a cassette and have them transferred. You can, however way you can come to these things, we live with these objects now. And so what would it mean to like go through these questions with somebody you care about? What would it mean to record these and just have these and gift these? They're really powerful ways to create heirlooms.
I was just talking with a lady who had a prompt from a website called storyworth.com, and they would send her these questions, or a lot of similar questions, and she would answer the questions in an email, and at the end of a year they compiled a book for her, and the book was all her life stories, and she could include photos, and it was pricey. I thought $100, but she came away with it with a book that she's going to leave for her children, for them to have all of her life story from childhood. I thought it was a wonderful project to complete, because our life is worth recording, because it's meaningful, because we have made an impact, because we do want to be remembered, and we want to feel the connection, and we want to have the ability to leave that behind and to be at peace within ourselves, to say, okay, what was the song by the Avett Brothers? When I want to put down the keys, no hard feelings, I'm done. I did a good job. Checking out.
Yeah.
That's how I want to do it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
If there's any other questions, please unmute yourself. If not, we're coming up on the hour, and I so appreciate everyone's time today.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.